The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the HSCS Relentless, their shrill cry mixing with the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the groan of buckling metal. Captain Sarachin gripped the armrest of her command chair as another impact sent shudders through the frigate's frame, watching her tactical display paint an increasingly desperate picture. 3 Vakrian destroyers circled her position like sharks that had scented blood in the water, their sleek silver hulls reflecting the light of the nearby star as they prepared for another attack run. The Relentless had been considered outdated even before this patrol began, a relic from humanity's first desperate years of fleet construction when Earth had barely understood the principles of faster-than-light travel. Now, with her port engine completely destroyed, hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, and her main railgun reduced to a twisted sculpture of superheated metal, the ship lived up to her name only in the stubborn refusal of her crew to abandon their posts. Shield generators are at 11%, Captain, Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez called from the engineering station, his dark eyes reflecting the angry red warning lights that had transformed the bridge into something resembling the inside of a dying star. One more direct hit and we're flying naked out here. Sarah nodded, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. The Vakrian sovereignty had been considered one of the more reasonable powers in this sector of the galaxy, a mercantile empire more interested in profit than conquest, but the 3 ships hunting her crew had clearly not received that particular memo. Or perhaps they had simply decided that human ships, with their crude welded hulls and primitive chemical propulsion backups, represented easy prey that wouldn't be missed in the vast bureaucratic tangle of galactic politics. The ambush had been perfectly executed, catching the Relentless during a routine survey of an uncharted asteroid field, far from any possibility of reinforcement from the rest of humanity's undermanned patrol groups. Communication channel still open, Captain, Ensign Yuki Tanaka reported from the communications console, her voice remarkably steady despite the fact that she was barely 20 standard years old and this was her first real engagement. The Vakrian commander continues to broadcast on all frequencies. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, already knowing what she would hear but understanding that refusing to listen would only confirm everything the aliens believed about humanity. Put it through, she ordered, and immediately the bridge speakers crackled to life with a sound that human linguists had determined was Vakrian laughter, a clicking, rattling noise like stones being shaken in a metal container. Primitive human vessel, your continued resistance is both admirable and foolish, the translated voice of Commander Thexral announced, the universal translator rendering his words in flat, emotionless English while preserving that underlying current of contempt. Your ship classification indicates you are a military frigate, yet my sensors show construction techniques that my civilization abandoned 3,000 cycles ago. Welded metal plates instead of molecular bonding, chemical fuel reserves as backup propulsion, and what appears to be an actual crew quarters section because your species cannot survive in proper hibernation during long voyages. You are flying a museum piece, Captain, and your fleet is the laughingstock of every civilized species in the assembly. The channel filled with that clicking laughter again, and Sarah could hear multiple Vakrian voices joining in, the entire bridge crew of the destroyer clearly finding this situation entertaining. Commander Thexral continued his broadcast, and Sarah noted that he had not bothered to encrypt or even narrow-beam the transmission, sending it out across all standard channels for anyone in range to intercept. The Sovereignty offers you one final opportunity to surrender your primitive vessel before we dismantle it for scrap. Your species has been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Assembly out of pity and curiosity, like one might adopt a stray animal that performs amusing tricks, but you must understand your place. Humanity has been traveling the stars for barely 15 of your years, while the Vakrian sovereignty has maintained interstellar civilization for 40,000. You build your ships like children stacking blocks, unaware that we possess manufacturing techniques that could construct a vessel superior to yours in the time it takes your sun to set. Surrender now, and we will allow your crew to live as examples of why lesser species should not pretend to military capability. Sarah opened her eyes and found her bridge crew looking at her with expressions ranging from rage to despair, every single one of them waiting for her decision. She thought about the 347 men and women aboard the Relentless, most of them younger than 30, volunteers who had joined Earth's hastily assembled stellar navy because they believed humanity deserved a place among the stars. She thought about the reports that had crossed her desk over the past year, incidents of human vessels being harassed by alien powers who viewed Earth's expanding presence as somewhere between a joke and an annoyance. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, 8 years old and convinced that her mother was a hero exploring the galaxy, unaware that most of that galaxy viewed humans as backward primitives who had stumbled onto faster-than-light technology without understanding the millions of years of social and technological development that had preceded it. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, what's the status of our faster-than-light drive?" Sarah asked, already pulling up engineering schematics on her personal display. Marcus consulted his readouts, fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Surprisingly intact, Captain. The Vakrians seem to be targeting our conventional systems, probably because they want to capture the ship relatively whole for study. FTL capacitors are charged to 78%, enough for a short jump, but our navigation systems took damage in the second attack run. I can't guarantee accuracy beyond general direction and distance." Sarah felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest, a feeling she had learned to recognize over years of military service as the moment when all safe options disappeared and only terrible choices remained. "Ensign Tanaka, open a response channel to the Vakrian commander," she ordered, her voice carrying across the bridge with the kind of calm that made veterans nervous and junior officers confident. Yuki's fingers flew across her console, and a confirmation light blinked green. Sarah stood from her command chair, straightening her uniform jacket in a gesture that was purely psychological but helped center her thoughts. "Commander Thexrau, this is Captain Sarachin of the Human Stellar Confederation ship Relentless. You are correct that our vessel represents earlier generation technology, and you are correct that humanity is new to galactic civilization. However, you have made a critical error in judgment that your species will remember for the next 40,000 cycles of your precious history." The clicking laughter from the Vakrian channel ceased abruptly, replaced by what the translator interpreted as curious attention. Sarah continued, letting her words fill the silence of the asteroid field and knowing that this transmission was likely being monitored by ships from a dozen different species, all of them waiting to see how the primitive humans would die. "You mock our welded hulls and chemical propulsion, our crew quarters and our crude construction techniques. You believe that technology determines capability, that the age of a civilization correlates directly with its effectiveness in combat. This is why your species, despite 40,000 years of development, has never been more than a regional power, controlling a handful of sectors through trade agreements and treaties. You have forgotten something that humanity learned in the blood and fire of our own history, something we discovered long before we ever reached the stars." She paused, watching her tactical display as the Vakrian destroyers adjusted their positions, tightening their formation in anticipation of her surrender. "You have forgotten that the most dangerous weapon in any conflict is not the ship or the gun or the shield generator. It is the mind of the being who refuses to accept defeat. Lieutenant Rodriguez, prepare the FTL drive for immediate jump on my command. Navigation coordinates as follows." Sarah began reading off a string of numbers that made Marcus's eyes widen in shock and then narrow in understanding. Around the bridge, crew members were pulling up the same calculations on their own displays, and she could see the moment when each one of them understood exactly what their captain intended to do. Some went pale, others smiled grimly, but not a single one voiced an objection. "Captain, those coordinates will put us inside the outer corona of the star," Marcus said quietly, his words carrying despite the continued wail of alarms and the groan of damaged systems. "Our heat shielding is rated for proximity operations, but not immersion. We'll have maybe 90 seconds before critical systems start failing, possibly less given our current damage." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display where 3 silver Vakrian destroyers continued their lazy circling pattern. 90 seconds is more than enough time, Lieutenant. Ensign Tanaka, I need a tight beam communication to the closest Human Stellar Confederation listening post, maximum encryption, sent the moment we initiate our jump. Include our current situation, enemy disposition, and my intentions. Make sure command understands that what happens next is my decision and mine alone." Yuki's fingers were already moving before Sarah finished speaking, the young ensign's face set in concentration as she assembled the message packet. "Ready to transmit on your order, "Captain," she reported, and Sarah heard the slight tremor in her voice that came from understanding without needing to ask what happens next actually meant. The Relentless shuddered again as the Vakrian destroyers fired what appeared to be warning shots, energy beams that passed within meters of the frigate's hull and turned nearby asteroids into clouds of superheated gas and molten rock. Commander Thexrau's voice returned to the communication channel, the clicking quality of his speech now carrying overtones that the translator struggled to interpret as either amusement or irritation. "Brave words from a captain whose ship is held together with primitive welds and desperate hope," the Vakrian commander announced. "You speak of minds and determination, but these things mean nothing when your hull is breached and your atmosphere spills into the void. I grow weary of this entertainment. You have 30 seconds to initiate your surrender sequence, or I will target your crew sections directly and add your bodies to the debris field as a warning to other humans who forget their place in the galactic hierarchy." Sarah checked her tactical display one final time, confirming positions and distances, calculating angles and velocities with the part of her mind that had been trained in stellar navigation and combat tactics at the Human Fleet Academy on Mars. The 3 Vakrian destroyers maintained their triangular formation, boxing in the Relentless with overlapping fields of fire, confident in their superior technology and their numerical advantage. "All hands, this is the captain," Sarah announced over the ship-wide communication system, her voice reaching every surviving crew member from the engine rooms to the damaged cargo bays to the medical stations where the wounded waited for an outcome they could not control. "Secure all stations for emergency faster-than-light transition and prepare for extreme thermal stress. What we are about to attempt has never been tested in combat conditions and will likely result in severe damage to our ship and possible casualties. However, the alternative is surrender to an enemy that views us as inferior beings worthy only of mockery and subjugation. I will not surrender this vessel, and I will not allow the Vakrian sovereignty to use us as an example of human weakness. If you trust me, if you believe that humanity deserves respect among the stars, then hold your positions and do your duties. We are going to show these aliens why you should never confuse primitive technology with primitive thinking." The response came not in words but in actions, damage control teams strapping themselves into emergency harnesses, engineering crews routing every available power cell to critical systems, weapons officers checking magazine loads on the point defense guns even though conventional wisdom said they would never get another chance to fire them. Sarah settled back into her command chair and began the final sequence, her fingers moving across her personal console with the smooth efficiency of hundreds of hours of simulation training. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, initiate FTL jump in 10 seconds. Ensign Tanaka, transmit our message to command the moment we enter faster than light. All crew, brace for transition." The countdown appeared on every display throughout the ship, numbers descending toward 0 while outside the hull 3 Vakrian destroyers suddenly realized that something was wrong, their formation breaking as they accelerated to attack positions. Commander Thexrau's voice exploded across the communication channel, the clicking sounds now clearly interpretable as alarm even without the translator's assistance. "Human vessel, you cannot jump from inside an asteroid field, the gravitational variances will tear you apart. Your navigation systems are damaged, you have no way to calculate safe coordinates. This is insanity, this is suicide." Sarah smiled, a cold expression that held no humor but carried a weight of absolute conviction. "You're right, Commander. It is insane. But insanity is just another word for doing what your enemy believes is impossible, and humanity has built our entire history on impossible achievements. You wanted to see what primitive humans are capable of when pushed to desperation. Let me provide a demonstration." The countdown reached 0. And the Relentless jumped, her FTL drive bending spacetime in ways that current galactic science could describe mathematically but still found profoundly unnatural. The asteroid field vanished, replaced for a subjective instant by the indescribable colors and geometries of faster-than-light transit, and then the frigate emerged exactly where Sarah had calculated, deep in the outer corona of the system's star. Alarms that had been screaming before now reached levels that would have been painful if the crew had not been sealed into their emergency suits, warning lights indicating that hull temperature was rising at catastrophic rates. The main view screen, heavily filtered to prevent radiation damage, showed a wall of stellar fire that filled the visible universe, plasma currents larger than planets swirling in magnetic fields that could have swallowed Earth's entire moon. Heat shields at maximum, Captain, but we're already exceeding safe parameters, Marcus reported, his voice tight with controlled fear as he watched his engineering readouts climb into red zones across every category. Hull temperature rising exponentially, estimate 70 seconds before we start losing critical systems. Sarah was barely listening, her entire attention focused on the tactical display that was now showing a very different picture than before. The 3 Vacrian destroyers had followed her jump, their superior sensor systems having tracked the relentless FTL transition and calculated her destination. They emerged from faster-than-light at the safe edge of the star's corona, their sleek silver hulls maintaining a comfortable distance from the roiling plasma, their weapons charging for what they clearly believed would be the final engagement against a human captain who had gone mad with desperation. Target lock on all 3 enemy vessels, the weapons officer reported, Lieutenant James Walker's Australian accent thick with anticipation despite their desperate circumstances. Point defense guns are all we have left, Captain, and they don't have the range to reach the Vacrians from this position. Sarah shook her head, still watching the tactical display with the intensity of a predator that had just maneuvered prey into the perfect position. We're not going to shoot them, Lieutenant. We're going to make them shoot us. Ensign Tanaka, open a channel to Commander Thexral, broad spectrum, maximum power. I want every ship in this system to hear what comes next. The communication channel opened, and Sarah could hear the background sounds of the Vacrian bridge, clicking voices raised in what might have been confusion or concern. Commander Thexral, you questioned humanity's place in the galactic community. You mocked our technology and our capabilities. You believed that superior age equaled superior capability. Allow me to educate you on a concept that human military theorists have understood for thousands of years, long before we ever reached the stars. She paused, watching the tactical display as the Vacrian destroyers adjusted their positions, no doubt preparing to fire into the corona to destroy the Relentless while she was trapped by the star's gravity well and thermal radiation. The concept is called mutually assured destruction, and it is very simple. If you fire on my ship, if you destroy the Relentless while we are positioned at these coordinates inside this star's corona, our reactor containment will fail. When a human ship's fusion reactor loses containment this deep in a stellar gravity well, it creates a cascading reaction with the surrounding plasma. Our scientists have models suggesting that such an event would destabilize the star's outer layers, creating a coronal mass ejection of unprecedented scale. Sarah's voice remained calm, almost conversational, as she described a cataclysm that could sterilize every planet in the inner system. The magnetic fields and plasma currents would channel that ejection directly along the vectors where your 3 ships are currently positioned. Your shields are designed to deflect weapons fire, Commander, not the equivalent of a stellar flare that has been gravitationally focused like a lens. The communication channel remained silent for a long moment, and Sarah. Imagine the Vacrian commander consulting with his science officers, running calculations, and coming to the terrible realization that the primitive human captain had just turned her dying ship into a trigger for a weapon of apocalyptic scale. When Thexral's voice finally returned, the clicking sounds carried none of their earlier contempt, replaced by something the translator interpreted as a combination of disbelief and dawning horror. You are bluffing. No captain would deliberately position their vessel to create such devastation. The resulting coronal mass ejection could damage the inhabited worlds in this system, could kill billions of beings who have nothing to do with our engagement. You would murder innocents to avoid surrender? Sarah leaned forward in her command chair, her reflection visible in the filtered view screen against the backdrop of stellar fire that surrounded her ship. You are absolutely correct, Commander. It would be murder. It would be unconscionable. It would be everything that civilized species in the Galactic Assembly have supposedly evolved beyond. But you made a critical error when you decided to attack a human vessel and broadcast your contempt for my species across open channels. You assume that because our technology is primitive, our thinking must be primitive as well. You forgot that humanity spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare on a single planet before we ever reached the stars. And we learned something during those bloody millennia that your 40,000-year-old civilization apparently never needed to understand. The hull temperature alarms were now constant, a solid tone that indicated the Relentless had moved beyond warnings into the realm of imminent structural failure, but Sarah's voice never wavered. We learned that the most terrifying opponent is not the one with the biggest gun or the strongest shield. It is the one who is willing to pay any price, accept any consequence, to ensure that their enemy pays an even higher cost. So here's my counteroffer, Commander Thexrau. You and your destroyers will withdraw from this system immediately. You will file a report with the Vakrian sovereignty explaining that you encountered a human patrol vessel and chose to avoid engagement. And you will never, ever mock humanity's fleet again, because now you know the truth that will spread through every species in the Galactic Assembly. The Relentless groaned, her hull plates expanding from thermal stress, her remaining systems pushed far beyond their design specifications, held together by the skill of her crew and the desperate mathematics of a captain who had bet everything on a single, terrible gamble. You will tell them that humans are insane, Sarah finished quietly. You will tell them that we are unpredictable, that we are dangerous, that we will turn our own deaths into weapons if that is what victory requires. You will tell them that our ships may be primitive, our technology may be crude, but our minds are the product of a species that survived and thrived on a death world through nothing but stubborn refusal to accept extinction. And most importantly, Commander, you will tell them that the next time anyone in the Galactic Assembly considers attacking a human vessel, they should remember the day when one broken ship became a galactic nightmare. The communication channel crackled with static interference from the stellar radiation, and for a moment Sarah genuinely did not know if the Vakrian commander would call her bluff, if she had miscalculated the alien psychology, if she had just doomed her crew and billions of innocent beings to prove a point about respect and dignity among the stars. Then, on the tactical display, the 3 Vakrian destroyers began to move, their silver hulls turning away from the star, their engines igniting for faster-than-light transition. Commander Thexrau's final transmission was brief, stripped of all the earlier contempt and replaced with something that might have been respect or might have been fear or might have been a combination that the translator had no words to properly convey. Withdraw acknowledged, human captain. The Vakrian sovereignty will remember this encounter. The 3 destroyers jumped, space-time bending to swallow their sleek forms, and suddenly the Relentless was alone in the star's corona with her hull temperature still climbing and her systems failing one by one. Get us out of here, Lieutenant Rodriguez, Sarah ordered, and Marcus's fingers flew across his console, the FTL drive engaging one final time to pull the frigate back into normal space at a safe distance from the star. The tactical display showed empty space, the Vakrian destroyers gone, the immediate threat ended, but the bridge crew remained silent as they assessed the cost of their captain's desperate gambit. Damage reports scrolled across every screen, painting a picture of a ship that had been pushed far beyond her limits, and Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of command settle back onto her shoulders now that the crisis had passed. She had turned the Relentless into a weapon of terror, had threatened destruction on a scale that violated every principle of proportional response, had bluffed with the lives of billions as her stakes. But she had also ensured that her crew survived, and she had sent a message that would echo through the Galactic Assembly's corridors of power. Humanity would not be mocked. Humanity would not accept subjugation. And humanity, despite all their primitive technology and crude construction techniques, was far more dangerous than any alien species had anticipated. The journey back to human-controlled space took the Relentless 6 days, limping through the void on backup systems while her crew worked around the clock to keep critical functions operational. Sarah stood in her ready room, staring at the damage reports that continued to accumulate on her personal terminal, each one a testament to how close they had come to complete destruction. 17 crew members injured, 3 seriously enough to require extended medical care. Hull integrity compromised on 8 decks. The port engine completely destroyed and the starboard engine operating at 40% capacity. The main reactor had stress fractures that would require a complete rebuild and dry dock. By any reasonable metric, the Relentless was a wreck that should have been declared a total loss, yet she was still moving, still functioning, held together by the determination of her crew and the skill of engineers who refused to accept that their ship was beyond saving. The communication from Fleet Command had arrived on the 4th day, transmitted via secure quantum entanglement channel to ensure no alien intelligence could intercept the contents. Admiral James Kowalski's weathered face had filled her screen, his expression carefully neutral as he informed Captain Chen that she was to proceed directly to Mars Naval Station upon arrival in human space, where a formal inquiry board would be convened to investigate the incident. The words were bureaucratic and procedural, but Sarah had served long enough to read between the lines. She was either going to be court-martialed for threatening to cause a stellar catastrophe, or she was going to be quietly celebrated as the captain who had forced the Galactic Assembly to take humanity seriously. Possibly both, depending on which way the political winds were blowing back on Earth. What Admiral Kowalski had not mentioned, but what Sarah discovered through unofficial channels and carefully encrypted messages from friends still serving in intelligence, was that her confrontation with Commander Thexral had not remained quiet. The Vakrian commander had indeed filed his report with the Sovereignty, and that report had been leaked within hours to the broader Galactic Assembly. Within days, every major species in known space had access to the full communication logs, the tactical data, and the analysis of exactly what Captain Sarachin had threatened to do. The reaction had been immediate and, from humanity's perspective, unexpectedly beneficial. Species that had previously dismissed human vessels as primitive curiosities were suddenly requesting formal meetings with Earth's diplomatic corps. Trade agreements that had been stalled for months were abruptly moving forward. And most tellingly, incidents of alien ships harassing human patrols had dropped to virtually zero. Lieutenant Rodriguez entered the ready room without knocking, a privilege Sarah had granted her senior officers during the long journey home. His uniform was stained with reactor coolant and his face showed the exhaustion of someone who had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in nearly a week, but his eyes held a spark of satisfaction. "We're crossing into human-controlled space in 20 minutes, Captain. Mars Naval Station has confirmed our approach vector and cleared all traffic from our path. They're treating us like a priority vessel, which is either very good or very bad news." Sarah managed a tired smile, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat across from her desk. "Given that we're returning in a ship that's barely holding together after threatening to murder billions of beings, I suspect it's both." Marcus settled into the chair with a grunt, his engineer's mind still clearly running calculations even as his body demanded rest. "The crew wants you to know that whatever happens with the inquiry board, they stand behind your decisions. We took a vote, completely unofficial of course, and it was unanimous. You saved our lives and you made those Vakrian bastards understand that humanity isn't prey to be hunted for sport." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest, a complex emotion that mixed pride with the heavy responsibility of knowing that 347 people had trusted her judgment enough to follow her into the heart of a star. "I appreciate that, Marcus, but the reality is more complicated. I gambled with lives that weren't mine to risk. If Commander Thexral had called my bluff, if he had fired on us anyway, we would have died and potentially taken billions of innocent beings with us." "But he didn't call your bluff," Marcus replied, leaning forward with an intensity that cut through his exhaustion. "You read the situation perfectly, Captain. You understood that the Vakrians, for all their superior technology and their 40,000 years of civilization, follow rules. They think in terms of acceptable losses and strategic objectives. They couldn't conceive of an opponent who would deliberately create a no-win scenario where everyone loses. That's not primitive thinking, that's asymmetric warfare at its finest. You turned our weakness into strength by convincing them that we're crazy enough to burn down the house with everyone inside rather than surrender." Sarah wanted to argue, to explain that what she had done was not strategy but desperation, but she was interrupted by the communication console on her desk chiming with an incoming priority message. The message was from Admiral Kowalski again, but this time his expression was less neutral and more concerned. "Captain Chen, I'm sending you this on a secure channel before you dock at Mars Naval Station because you need to be prepared for what's waiting. The inquiry board is still happening, that's non-negotiable given the magnitude of your actions, but you should know that you've become something of a celebrity. Every major news network on Earth and the colonies is running stories about the human captain who stared down 3 alien warships with nothing but a broken frigate and absolute conviction. The diplomatic corps is simultaneously horrified and delighted because the Galactic Assembly is treating humanity with newfound caution that looks remarkably similar to respect. You've changed the equation, Sarah, and there are people in fleet command and civilian government who want to use that change to advance human interests. But there are also people who are terrified that you've painted a target on our entire species by convincing the galaxy that we're unstable and dangerous. The Admiral paused, choosing his next words carefully. When you dock, you'll be met by a security detail that will escort you directly to the inquiry board. The proceedings will be closed to media, but I expect the results will leak within hours. My advice, off the record, is to be completely honest about your decisions and your reasoning. Don't try to justify what you did as standard military tactics, because it wasn't. Explain that you made a choice in an impossible situation, and let the board decide whether that choice fell within the bounds of acceptable command discretion. Whatever happens, know that a lot of people in this fleet are proud of what you accomplished, even if they can't say so officially until after the inquiry concludes. The message ended, and Sarah sat in silence for a long moment, processing the implications of becoming both a hero and a potential war criminal simultaneously. The Relentless docked at Mars Naval Station 40 minutes later, her battered hull sliding into a repair berth designed for vessels twice her size, while crews of engineers and technicians gathered to assess the damage. Sarah watched through the viewport of an airlock as her crew disembarked, many of them stopping to touch the bulkheads of their ship in gestures that mixed affection with farewell. They had survived together, had faced death together, and now they were being separated while admirals and politicians decided what their survival meant for humanity's future among the stars. The security detail that met Sarah was professional and courteous, but she noted that they were armed and that they positioned themselves to prevent any possibility of her deviating from the planned route to the inquiry board chambers. The inquiry itself was held in a secure conference room deep within the station's administrative section, a windowless space dominated by a long table where 5 senior officers sat in judgment. Sarah recognized 3 of them: Admiral Kowalski, Admiral Wei Lin from Strategic Planning, and Commodore Elizabeth Okonkwo, who commanded the Mars Defense Fleet. The other 2 were civilians, representatives from Earth's government who were here to ensure that military decisions aligned with broader political objectives. For 6 hours they questioned her, dissecting every decision from the moment the Vakrian destroyers had first appeared on her sensors to the final desperate jump into the stellar corona. Sarah answered honestly, refusing to characterize her actions as anything other than what they were: a calculated bluff made from a position of complete desperation, leveraging the only advantage she possessed, which was the enemy's assumption that she would act rationally according to their definition of rationality. Admiral Wei Lin, a stern woman whose career had included command positions during humanity's first contact with 3 separate alien species, leaned forward during a break in questioning and asked the question that Sarah had been dreading. "Captain Chen, by your own admission, you threatened to cause a coronal mass ejection that could have resulted in billions of casualties on the inhabited worlds of that system. You used the potential death of innocents as leverage in what was, from the Vakrian perspective, a relatively minor engagement over a single frigate. How do you reconcile that decision with the laws of warfare that humanity has developed specifically to prevent such disproportionate responses?" Sarah met the Admiral's gaze directly, refusing to look away even though her career and possibly her freedom depended on how she answered. "I can't reconcile it, Admiral," Sarah said quietly. "What I threatened was, by any measure, a war crime. If I had actually caused that coronal mass ejection, I would deserve to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of human and galactic law. But the alternative was to surrender my ship and my crew to an enemy that had made clear they viewed us as inferior beings worthy only of mockery and subjugation. The Vakrians attacked us not because we posed a threat but because they believed we were weak enough to attack without consequence. They broadcast their contempt across open channels, ensuring that every species monitoring that region of space would witness human humiliation. If I had surrendered, we would have confirmed everything the galaxy believes about humanity, that we are primitives playing at civilization, tolerated only because more advanced species find us amusing." Sarah took a breath, organizing her thoughts. "I made a choice that the Vakrian commander would understand that humanity cannot be measured by the age of our civilization or the sophistication of our technology. I needed him to understand that we are fundamentally different from species that have had millions of years to evolve past their survival instincts. We are still new enough to violence, still close enough to our origins as persistence hunters on a death world, that we will do things that seem insane to more civilized species. I didn't want to kill billions of beings, Admiral. I wanted to create a scenario where Commander Thexral understood that attacking human vessels comes with risks that cannot be calculated using conventional strategic analysis. And it worked. The Vakrians withdrew, my crew survived, and the innocents in that system never knew how close they came to catastrophe. The inquiry board deliberated for 2 days while Sarah remained in a guest quarters on the station that was technically not a detention cell but functionally served the same purpose. She spent the time reading reports from across human-controlled space, watching as the ramifications of her confrontation rippled through diplomatic and military channels. The Vakrian sovereignty had issued a formal complaint to the Galactic Assembly, accusing humanity of deploying weapons of mass destruction in violation of multiple treaties, but the complaint had been quietly shelved when other species pointed out that the Vakrians had initiated hostilities against a damaged vessel in neutral space. More interesting were the unofficial communications from alien species that had previously shown little interest in humanity. The Zentari Collective, a hive mind species that controlled significant territory in the galactic north, had requested detailed tactical analysis of the engagement, apparently fascinated by what they called humanity's novel approach to threat projection. The Kthex clans, a warrior culture that had initially dismissed humans as too soft and disorganized for serious military consideration, had sent a message to Earth's diplomatic corps that roughly translated to an expression of respect for what they termed appropriate use of asymmetric advantage in desperate circumstances. Even the ancient archivists, a species so old that they had records of civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth's sun had finished forming, had issued a rare commentary noting that humanity's actions demonstrated the unpredictable nature of species still in their aggressive developmental phase and recommending that other assembly members approach human vessels with appropriate caution. Sarah read these reports with a mixture of satisfaction and unease, understanding that she had achieved the objective of making the galaxy take humanity seriously but uncertain about the long-term consequences of being perceived as dangerously unstable. On the third day, the inquiry board recalled her to the conference room and Admiral Kowalski delivered their verdict. Captain Sarachin, this board has carefully considered your actions during the engagement with Vakrian forces in the Theta Serpentis system. We find that while your decisions pushed the boundaries of acceptable military conduct and created risks that could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life, they were made in good faith under extreme duress and ultimately achieved strategic objectives that benefit humanity's standing in the Galactic Assembly. Therefore, this board declines to recommend court-martial proceedings. However, we are issuing a formal reprimand to be entered in your service record, noting that the use of potential mass casualties as a bargaining tool, regardless of circumstances, represents conduct that cannot be officially condoned by Human Stellar Confederation Fleet Command. The Admiral paused, and something that might have been a smile flickered across his weathered features. Off the record, Captain, you managed to accomplish something that our diplomatic corps has been attempting for 15 years. You made the galaxy understand that humanity is not to be taken lightly, that our primitive technology does not reflect primitive thinking, and that we are willing to pay prices that more civilized species find incomprehensible. The number of incidents involving harassment of human vessels has dropped by 90% since your confrontation became public knowledge. Species that were demanding unreasonable concessions in trade negotiations are suddenly willing to compromise. And Fleet Command has received increased funding from the civilian government specifically to expand our patrol capabilities because politicians finally understand that our presence in space is not just about exploration but about ensuring that humanity commands respect among the stars. Sarah was officially released from the inquiry process and given 60 days of leave while the Relentless underwent complete reconstruction in drydock. She spent the first week on Earth, visiting her daughter and trying to explain in 8-year-old terms what had happened without traumatizing the child with discussions of stellar catastrophes and galactic politics. She spent the second week on Mars, working with engineers to redesign certain systems on the Relentless, incorporating lessons learned from the engagement and ensuring that her ship would be even more formidable when she returned to active service. And she spent the remaining weeks reading reports, attending classified briefings, and slowly coming to understand the full scope of how a single desperate gambit had altered humanity's trajectory among the stars. The most significant change came not from military channels but from civilian space exploration companies and colonial administrations. Human vessels, both military and civilian, were now being treated with what could only be described as cautious respect by alien species that previously would have ignored or dismissed them. Trade convoys that had required extensive negotiations for safe passage permits were suddenly being waved through checkpoints with minimal inspection. Colonial surveys in disputed territories were proceeding without the constant harassment from alien claim jumpers that had plagued earlier expeditions. And perhaps most tellingly, 3 separate alien species had approached Earth's government with proposals for technology-sharing agreements that would have been unthinkable before the Theta Serpentis incident. When Sarah finally returned to Mars Naval Station to oversee the final stages of the relentless reconstruction, she found that her ship had become something of a legend. Engineers requested transfers to her crew, experienced officers volunteered for positions that would normally be considered career dead-ends aboard an aging frigate, and civilian contractors worked overtime to ensure that every system was rebuilt to specifications that exceeded original design parameters. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been promoted to full commander and offered his choice of postings, had declined all other opportunities to remain as the relentless chief engineer. Ensign Tanaka had likewise refused transfers, as had most of the original crew who had survived the encounter with the Vakrian destroyers. On the day the Relentless was officially recommissioned and cleared for active duty, Admiral Kowalski attended the ceremony personally, a rare honor for a vessel that was still classified as a second-generation frigate despite her extensive upgrades. He stood beside Sarah on the observation deck overlooking the dry dock, watching as final system checks scrolled green across engineering displays. "You know that every alien intelligence service in the assembly is going to be watching your ship from now on," the Admiral said conversationally. "You've become the human that proved we're either brilliant strategists or completely insane, and nobody can quite decide which interpretation is correct. That makes you simultaneously an asset and a liability to Fleet Command." Sarah nodded, her eyes on her ship, noting how the new hull plating gleamed under the drydock lights and how the rebuilt engines hummed with barely contained power. "Permission to speak freely, Admiral?" Kowalski smiled. "After what you've already done, Captain, I think we're past the point of formal protocols. Speak your mind." Sarah turned to face him, her expression serious. "I didn't set out to become a symbol or to change how the galaxy perceives humanity. I was trying to save my crew using the only leverage I had available. But if my actions have bought us time, if they've made alien species think twice before attacking human vessels, then I'll accept whatever role Fleet Command needs me to fill. The galaxy has had millions of years to establish its hierarchies and its assumptions about how civilized species behave. Maybe it's good that humanity showed up to disrupt those assumptions, to remind everyone that the universe is bigger and stranger than any single species' understanding of it." The Admiral considered this for a long moment before responding. "The philosophers and the historians will debate for generations whether what you did was heroism or recklessness, whether it represents the best or worst of human nature. But I'll tell you what I think, Sarah. I think you did what humans have always done when confronted with impossible odds. You refused to accept the limitations that others tried to impose, you found a way to turn weakness into strength, and you survived through sheer stubborn determination to prove that you deserved to survive. That's the essence of humanity's journey into space, and that's why despite all our primitive technology and crude construction techniques, we're going to become one of the powers that shapes the future of galactic civilization." 6 months later, the Relentless departed Mars Naval Station on a new patrol assignment, her crew refreshed and her systems operating at peak efficiency. As the frigate accelerated away from Mars and engaged her faster-than-light drive, Sarah sat in her command chair and reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day in the Theta Serpentis system. The galaxy still viewed human technology as primitive, human ships as outdated, and human construction techniques as crude approximations of proper engineering. But now, when alien vessels encountered the distinctive energy signature of a human ship, they maintained respectful distances. When human captains entered diplomatic negotiations, their alien counterparts approached with caution rather than contempt. And when the Galactic Assembly discussed humanity's role in interstellar affairs, they did so with the understanding that humans could not be measured by conventional metrics of civilization and technological development. Captain Saracen had turned a broken ship into a galactic nightmare not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through the simple expedient of convincing the enemy that she was willing to do what they believed was impossible. In doing so, she had taught the galaxy a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations, that humanity's greatest strength was not the ships they built or the weapons they deployed, but the minds of beings who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible when survival demanded the extraordinary. The Relentless jumped to faster than light, carrying her crew and her captain toward whatever challenges awaited in the vast darkness between the stars, a primitive vessel crewed by a species that had proven that primitive origins meant nothing when matched against the human capacity for adaptation, innovation, and the absolute refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. And across the galaxy, in the council chambers of the Vakrian sovereignty and the strategic planning centers of a dozen other alien civilizations, military analysts and diplomatic advisors were all reaching the same conclusion: humanity had arrived among the stars, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be quite the same again. The species that had built their first faster-than-light vessel barely 15 years ago, that still used welded hull plates and chemical propulsion backups, that required crew quarters because they could not survive long voyages in hibernation, had demonstrated something that 40,000-year-old civilizations had forgotten or never learned. They had shown that the most dangerous weapon in any conflict was not technology or numbers or even tactical superiority, but the willingness to rewrite the rules of engagement when the situation demanded it, to turn disasters into opportunities, and to transform a single broken ship into a symbol that would make the entire galaxy remember one fundamental truth: never, ever underestimate humanity.